Hi everyone, and thanks so much for joining us for this 2:30 presentation, and thanks for sticking through those audio issues we were experiencing just now. My name is Chris Hughes. I'm the staff attorney at FairVote and serve as liaison between FairVote and the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center. I'll be presenting the first part of today's presentation, and my colleague Karen Brinson Bell, who administered ranked choice voting elections in North Carolina, will present the second half. And before we really dive in, I'm going to talk just a bit about the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center ourselves. The Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center provides a compilation of best practices and firsthand experiences from jurisdictions that have used this method of voting. The website, www.rankedchoicevoting.org, and the overall project serve as resources for voters, election administrators, policymakers, candidates, and others. A recording of today's session will be available on our website within a few weeks. The consulting team of the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center is composed of former election administrators who have worked on RCV elections. Our colleagues include Gary Bartlett, who served as the state elections director for North Carolina for 20 years. He will also join us at the end of the presentation for a Q&A. Also part of our team, but unable to join us today, are George Gilbert, who served as elections director for Guilford County, North Carolina for 25 years, and Connie Schmidt, who was head of elections for Johnson County, Kansas for many years. The team is not advocacy focused. Rather, we aim to provide resources that allow jurisdictions to implement ranked choice voting effectively and efficiently. With extensive elections experience and working together overseeing statewide, municipal, and district RCV elections, our team has focused on expanding the resources and information available regarding the administration of and education about ranked choice voting. At no cost to jurisdictions, our team is available to assist in developing implementation plans, processes for tabulating results with current voting equipment, voter education, and more. Our goal as the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center team is to help election officials understand ranked choice voting and how to administer elections using this method. We were asked to present today because the Washington Voting Rights Act might result in the use of alternative remedies to address vote dilution. And I'm sure you're all aware of this, but vote dilution means briefly that minority communities vote cohesively, but the way the election works in their city, county, or state means they're unable to elect representatives of choice. This tends to mean that a majority or only a plurality of voters control the makeup of the whole body to the exclusion of minorities. In the past, claims of vote dilution meant moving from at-large block voting, like that used for at-large city council elections in Washington, to district elections, like those used in congressional elections. But there are other ways of remedying vote dilution than moving straight to districts. And that's where alternative remedies for us today, ranked choice voting, come in. So in this session, we're going to be talking about how ranked choice voting could remedy vote dilution targeted by the Washington Voting Rights Act, why other jurisdictions have adopted ranked choice voting, where it's used, how it works, ranked choice voting, voter education, and results presentation, provide an update on voting equipment, and share some post-election statistics. There are two major forms of ranked choice voting, single winner and multi-winner. The focus of this presentation is multi-winner, but I'll briefly describe how both work in a few slides. And you may already be familiar with single winner ranked choice voting from its brief use in Pierce County, Washington from 2006 to 2009. We're not going to dive in on that in the presentation, but we can answer questions about their use of RCV during the Q&A session. So let's start by talking about the benefits of ranked choice voting for voters. The big impact of multi-winner ranked choice voting is the potential for proportional representation. That's the thing that helps remedy vote dilution. So what is proportional representation? As the phrase implies, proportional representation is representation that reflects the mix of views and interests of which the jurisdiction is made up. Multi-winner ranked choice voting assures that any substantial like-minded group can win representation roughly in proportion to its share of the vote in the represented region. This stands in contrast to winner-take-all systems in which, as mentioned, a majority or even a plurality of voters controls the makeup of the whole body to the exclusion of minorities. In proportional representation systems, a majority of voters will still elect a majority of a legislative body, but smaller groups have the power to elect representatives as well. The idea behind proportional representation was well stated by 19th century theologian and philosopher Ernest Neville. In a democratic government, the right of decision belongs to the majority, but the right of representation belongs to all. Some of the benefits of proportional representation include wider representation. We'll demonstrate this shortly, but in general, among voters, there are fewer losers. Most voters end up supporting a winning candidate. Candidate quality and diversity may also be encouraged. When single-seat districts are uncompetitive, the minority party or other voting group finds it difficult to recruit high-quality candidates capable of running a competitive campaign. This is because the outcome of the election is a foregone conclusion. Proportional representation can also enhance diversity of representation within parties. Voters within our major parties have a fairly wide range of views on many issues. A PR system has the ability to represent that range of views within a party or other voting group, as well as positions across groups or parties. Historically, many voting rights complaints center around the problems of plurality at large elections. The most common fix proposed in such situations was the imposition of district elections. The challenge is this approach relies on sufficient segregation that such districts can be created. And that sort of segregation can be hard to find in cities in Washington and cities across the United States. Proportional representation and multi-winner ranked choice voting avoid that problem while remedying the underlying problem just as well, if not better than districts. In addition to the potential for its use in Washington Voting Rights Act cases, advocates are working in California to introduce multi-winner ranked choice voting as a remedy to claims filed under the California Voting Rights Act to better represent well-integrated racial and ethnic minority communities in that state. Oh, one slide too early. Further complicating the picture, a federal 3-judge panel in Wisconsin struck down that state's congressional districts as an unconstitutional partisan gerrymander in 2016. This ruling places the primary historical basis for drawing districts on uncertain legal footing. That case is before the Supreme Court now, and we'll hear the court's decision on the case sometime before the month of June. And there's been a lot of cases like this in states across the country, but Wisconsin has been the focus. So with both traditional at-large elections and the traditional basis for drawing single-member districts suspect under the law, proportional representation may provide a constitutional and fair solution. Multi-winner RCV uses larger multi-seat districts but fills those seats proportionally. Minorities as well as majorities are empowered to elect representatives in proportion to their numbers. Nearly all voters are able to contribute to the election of a representative of which they approve. This is a photo of the Cambridge, Massachusetts City Council. Cambridge has used multi-winner ranked choice voting since 1941 to elect their school board and city council, and is a relatively diverse city. 2/3 of its residents are white, while the other third of residents identify themselves as Black, Asian or Pacific Islander, or some other race. African American and Asian American communities are both able to elect representatives of choice to those boards. And based on analysis from FairVote, somewhere between 92 and 95% of Cambridge voters are regularly able to help elect one of their top 3 choices in these municipal elections. And you can see how this creates proportional representation for the diverse Cantabrigian community in this photo. So as I mentioned before, RCV will likely come up for you in the context of vote dilution concerns for minority communities, but RCV doesn't just help solve vote dilution. From an individual voter's perspective, there are more good reasons for using ranked choice voting. First, the voter might only need to make one trip to the polls. Minneapolis, which started using ranked choice voting in 2009, eliminated their primary election, so voters only go to vote once in the general election. And in states holding runoff elections, military and overseas voters are finding it easier to vote. They receive one ballot and vote one time in each election, because often these Uokava voters have found it difficult to participate in runoff elections due to ballot delivery issues. Campaigning also becomes less negative because candidates realize that if they're not a voter's first choice, then they want to be that voter's second or third choice. With the ability to eliminate low voter turnout elections, such as primary elections, jurisdictions can also save taxpayer dollars. With more voters participating in one election, that leads to an outcome that more fairly represents more voters. It can be a win-win for both the voters and for the election jurisdiction. So you may have heard, but Maine just used ranked choice voting for statewide primaries for the first time on Tuesday. And a total of another 11 cities are using ranked choice voting in their municipal election, in the states of Minnesota, California, Colorado, Maine, Massachusetts, Maryland, and New Mexico. Minneapolis, Minnesota, and as I mentioned, Cambridge, Cambridge, Massachusetts, are using the multi-winner proportional form that I'm focusing on today. So I'll cover the history really briefly, and then I'll get to how ranked choice voting is counted. Multi-winner was used in 24 American cities for their city councils or school boards in the period 1915 to 1962. One of those cities was Worcester, Massachusetts, whose 1955 city council ballot is pictured on the right side of this slide. Multi-winner ranked choice voting was adopted in these cities due to demands for minority party representation on councils and school boards, and a desire to decrease the power and influence of party bosses in cities. This worked, but party bosses were still around and were pretty unhappy with that result. So they would work with the second most popular party in these jurisdictions and get ranked choice voting repealed. So by 1962, 23 of those 24 cities had repealed multi-winner, leaving only Cambridge behind. But they've continued since then to use ranked choice voting for these city council and school board elections, and just held their most recent elections in November 2017. If you want to learn more about this history, you can check out our History of Ranked Choice Voting webinar with Jack Santucci, who is an academic studying their history. Interest in ranked choice voting began a resurgence in the late 1990s and early 2000s, starting in San Francisco. Most adoptions have been of the single winner form, but multi-winner ranked choice voting was adopted in Minneapolis, like I said, for 2 local boards in 2006. Benton County, Oregon also adopted ranked choice voting in 2016 and should be using it for the first time in 2020. And as mentioned earlier, Maine just used it for the first time on Tuesday. Ranked choice voting bills were introduced in 16 states at the city, county, or state level in 2018. Like with any legislation, some bills don't move forward, but several RCV bills did this year. For example, the state of Utah authorized municipalities to use ranked choice voting for mayor and council races. So we anticipate seeing a few Utah cities adopt ranked choice voting soon. Ranked choice voting is also used for student and faculty elections in colleges and universities in 22 states. And multi-winner has been used in Australia, Ireland, Northern Ireland, Scotland, New Zealand, and Malta for local, state level, and national elections for decades. So now that I've covered this introduction to RCV, why it's used and where it's used, I'll cover the 2 major types of ranked choice voting elections and how they work. That is single winner contests and multi-winner contests. Before I get to that, I just want to point out multi-winner and single winner ranked choice voting are presented on the same ballot format, with voters simply ranking their choices in order of preference. The real difference between these methods is in the counting. So single winner contests are most appropriate for executive office contests such as mayor, governor, president, and is often referred to as instant runoff voting. Single winner RCV is particularly effective when there are numerous candidates vying for a single executive seat or where one faction's votes are split between 2 or more candidates. As mentioned, this was just used in Maine for their primaries for governor, and Democrats had 7 candidates running for the Democratic nomination. We'll be finding out the results of that race soon, Monday or Tuesday. They'll also be using ranked choice voting in the fall to elect their US senators and representatives in Congress. Rather than only voting for one candidate, candidates are ranked according to the voter's preference: first choice, second choice, third choice, and so on. On election night, those top choices are counted first. If there's no majority winner, a series of tabulation rounds is executed where the lowest vote getter is eliminated, and that candidate's ballots are counted for their next choice. In effect, a voter's ballot can still be considered even when his or her first choice is defeated. While counting may stop when one candidate receives a majority of votes, a better a better gauge of community support is obtained when rounds are counted until only 2 candidates remain. Multi-winner ranked choice voting, also known as the single transferable vote or STV, is the preferred option for electing a legislative body, such as a city council, a state legislature, or even the US House of Representatives. As mentioned, it ensures a diversity of winners. It assures both majority rule and fair minority representation without resorting to single member districts. As with single winner ranked choice voting, voters rank candidates and the top choices are counted first. But at this point, a threshold of election is calculated according to the formula total votes cast divided by number of seats plus 1. This might be best understood as a percentage and results in a threshold of 25% for 3-seat contests, a threshold of 20% for 4-seat contests, and a threshold of 10% for 9-seat contests. For example, with the 9-member Cambridge, Massachusetts Council, if there were 9,000 votes cast, the threshold would be 9,000 divided by 10, which equals 9 votes, or 900 votes, or 10%. And that's the percentage or share of the vote a candidate needs to surpass in order to get elected. Now, being elected with 10% of the vote may not sound like majority rule, but if there were one majority winner from each of 9 single districts, each representative would have been elected by a very small percentage of the total vote. Say each district has 1,000 voters, and each winner gets 51%. They would each have less than 6% of that citywide vote, as you can see with the math on the screen. In a similar ranked choice voting multi-seat election, each winner would be required to receive more than 900 votes to reach that 10% threshold. In fact, in filling any number of seats, multi-winner RCV requires greater support for winners than a comparable single-member district method. Next, if a candidate's votes exceed the threshold, the extra votes are proportionally transferred to the voter's next highest ranked candidate. This ensures that all votes are fully meaningful to the outcome and that a majority view will elect a majority of the seats. Then, if there are still seats to be filled, just as in single winner RCV, the candidate with the fewest votes is eliminated, and his or her votes are then counted for their next highest ranked candidate. So that covers how ranked choice voting works and why it might be imposed in Washington Voting Rights Act cases. I'll hand you over now to Karen to discuss implementing ranked choice voting.
Thanks, Chris. And I'm not sure about the audience, but I'm not seeing the next slide. While Chris pulls that up, I do want to say thank you for having us be part of your conference, and especially for allowing us to present remotely, obviously with the main election going on this week. And also, I've been helping with elections in Charleston, South Carolina. Being across the country was going to be a difficult feat, but so this is a great solution and we appreciate it. So now that we've laid the groundwork for this voting method and why it gets used today, let's talk about how to administer an RCV election. There are many more components to an RCV election than we can ever cover in this presentation, so we're highlighting key aspects central to effective administration of elections. You can find detailed information on budgeting, auditing, recounts, and other administration topics that we do not touch on today. Those are in our model implementation plan, also in our webinars and our podcasts. First, designing the RCV ballot. As election administrators, you know that with any election, it is important for the ballot to be easy for voters to understand and navigate. Such is true for a ranked choice voting ballot, which is why the Resource Center has partnered with the Center for Civic Design to provide some good examples for designing a ranked choice voting ballot. The first example on this slide is a ballot using the grid style design. This design provides for a large number of candidate rankings. You can see in this example, the voter may mark their choices 1 through 10. The center example is the column style, and this particular example provides up to 3 rankings per voter. This is simpler for the voter, but limits them to 3 rankings and tends to take up more space on a ballot than the grid style. The final ballot on this slide is a hand-entered ranked ballot. This kind of ballot is used in international RCV elections, but has not yet been used in an American RCV election. It allows voters to write in the ranking they prefer for each candidate. You will notice the easy to understand ballot marking instructions provided at the top of each ballot. All modern voting systems allow you to have a mixed RCV and non-RCV contest ballot. In these circumstances, we've seen that as long as ballots are well designed with clear instructions, voters have no problem switching between RCV and non-RCV contests on the same ballot. The ballot on this slide was used in Burlington, Vermont in their 2006 RCV election. As you can see on this slide, the voter can select a first choice, a second choice, a third choice, and so on. Depending on your voting system's software, voters may be limited to 3 rankings. Other software allows up to 10, and still others allow voters to rank all candidates. So there are options out there among our voting equipment. The instructions for voting a ballot are very similar to voting a regular ballot. Fill in only 1 vote per column and don't skip columns. The voters can choose to rank as many or as few candidates as they want, and if allowed, they can choose to write in a candidate's name in the write-in space. One important thing for voters is to emphasize that in RCV, you need only cast 1 ranking to have your ballot counted. But for your ballot to go the farthest, you should rank multiple candidates. Now we'll briefly cover some types of ballot errors voters might make in RCV and how to handle those errors. Just like a regular ballot, if the voter chooses more than 1 candidate in the first choice column, it's an overvote, and none of the choices can be counted. Of course, voters always have the option to request a replacement ballot to correct this and any other errors. In this example, the first choice will be counted, but the voter's second choice cannot be counted because it is an overvote. If a voter had indicated a 3rd ranking, some jurisdictions count that 3rd ranking after skipping the overvote. Others will stop counting at the overvote. The rules vary. Voters need to remember to select only 1 candidate in each ranking. The voter's first choice on this slide will be counted, but their second and third choice cannot be counted because they voted for the same candidate in all 3 choices. Voters must be instructed that they can only vote 1 time for each candidate. Now that we've discussed how to design the ballot and how ballots may be marked, let's talk a little bit about voter education. Educating voters about ranked choice voting can build off of existing voter education efforts, and they vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction depending on other education efforts that they've done. So let's look at what a few places are doing or have done in voter education on RCV. Earlier in this webinar, Chris mentioned the city of Minneapolis and their use of ranked choice voting. On this slide, I want to highlight some of their best practices for voter outreach and education. First of all, their new website, vote.minneapolismn.gov, contains a full resource of information about ranked choice voting, a tool that comes in handy for both voters and candidates. They rely heavily on social media to educate the public, using Twitter and Facebook. They have developed videos highlighting how to mark the ballot and count the votes, and have posted them on YouTube and their webpage. Voter outreach handouts are provided in 6 different languages, and by far the most effective outreach tool for learning about ranked choice voting has been their voter information guide that is mailed to all registered voters. This slide shows an example of a voter outreach handout used in Minneapolis, which details how to mark the ballot. With Maine, the Maine Secretary of State's office actually administers elections, and they have put out a helpful video explaining their ballot adjudication and counting processes a few weeks ago. The full video is about 5 minutes, so we'll just watch a brief portion to get a sense of how administrators are explaining this method to their voters, especially the first time out.
The state of Maine will be using the ranked choice method of voting for the primary election on June 12, 2018. Only 4 races have more than 2 candidates and will be determined by ranked choice voting: the Democratic nomination for the office of governor, the Republican nomination for the office of governor, the Democratic nomination for the representative to Congress in Congressional District 2, and the Republican nomination for representative to the Maine legislature in House District 75. Ranked choice voting allows voters to choose candidates in order of preference. The votes are tabulated in rounds until only 2 candidates remain and one candidate is determined to have received the majority of the votes in the final round. That candidate is then declared the winner. Here's how the tabulation works. Let's assume there are 4 candidates for governor. Let's say that blue is your first choice, the person you would most like to see win that elected office. Yellow is your second choice, and if neither of them can win, you'd rather see purple in that office before orange. So you rank purple third and orange fourth. You are not required to choose more than one candidate if you do not want to participate in ranking. Your first choice candidate for that office will be counted on election night. If no candidate receives a majority, the voting will move into ranked choice voting rounds. All of the ballots
Perhaps Chris and I should have been animated today, just like the Secretary of State. We felt like that was a pretty good video, and hope that you'll watch the rest of it to get a better understanding of how Maine is administering their ranked choice voting elections as we speak. So they also created a website dedicated to RCV in the state, which all their voter education and administrative materials that they've created for RCV have been included. In addition, voter and RCV advocacy groups such as the League of Women Voters, Represent Us, and the Committee for Ranked Choice Voting, they've canvassed door to door and sent out mailers educating voters about RCV. We'll have exit polling data out of Maine soon to help understand the effectiveness of the voter education campaign and how voters have learned about RCV and their experience with using the voting method. Santa Fe also partnered with local advocacy groups to educate voters about RCV before their first ever use of the voting method this spring. They even produced a website with the help of a grant from a local nonprofit to help educate voters. A screenshot of that website is included on this slide. Santa Fe also took advantage of social media with Facebook and Twitter accounts, providing voters with educational material. We'll focus now on results presentation, which also serves as voter education, helping voters anticipate how results will be presented and teaching them how the results are actually counted. Furthermore, we've learned that this helps voters understand how to effectively mark their ballots. We've worked with the Center for Civic Design to produce best practices for results presentation. I will walk you through their example results presentation now for multi-winner RCV elections. First, they show a summary of results explaining who won and in which round of counting those winners were named. Then they explain the basic rules, setting the threshold, that is using the number of votes needed, and then showing how surplus transfers work and explaining when candidates are eliminated. The smaller text provides detailed information not necessary to understand who won, but providing helpful context. Then the guide explains how results will be shown, round by round, step by step. So here's round 1. No one has been elected yet, but you can see everyone's relative share of the first choice support. Because Betsy Perez crossed the threshold in round 1, she gets declared elected and has her surplus votes transferred. Here's the visual. Her bar turns gold to show that she has won, and surplus votes are shown as blue highlights next to the candidates who received those votes. So next, it's Andrea Smith that's eliminated because she has the smallest share of support. We see that on this screen. Then Joseph Jackson is eliminated next, and his votes transfer too. You'll notice that Betsy Perez could have been ranked on ballots that counted for Joseph Jackson, but those ballots skip her and go to the next ranked candidate who has not been elected. We'll go into the next round, where Mary Chan wins and has her surplus transfer. This puts Steve Lorenzo over the top, and we have our final results. You can see a candidate by candidate breakdown next, and results reports could also include downloads of cast vote records or other ballot information files for the public. More information is available in the Center for Civic Design reports on RCV usability, and in a number of webinar presentations, podcasts, and various times that we've worked with the Center for Civic Design to discuss their findings. And they also are able to make this available to you if you like this format of results presentation. But suffice it to say, voters understand RCV better and trust their ballots more when they feel they understand the results. This means following the guidelines here and being transparent with voters about the results reporting timeline that you're following. The next big question is, how do you tabulate the votes? Currently, there are 2 voting system vendors that have EAC certified systems with ranked choice voting, those being Unison and Hart InterCivic. Unison provides 3 rankings and Hart provides up to 6 rankings, both using grid-style ballots. Neither of these certified voting systems have been used in a ranked choice voting yet, however. Dominion's Sequoia Optech Insight is their legacy equipment, and it has been certified for ranked choice voting by the state of California, but only California. So far, it has been used in San Francisco and Alameda County, which is limited to 3 rankings. Their new platform, Dominion's new platform, Democracy Suite, has an RCV module and provides for up to 10 rankings. It was used in Santa Fe for their RCV elections in March of this year. It is not yet EAC certified. This slide shows you an actual Dominion ballot. This is the one from Santa Fe. That was in March of this year. And here we have Hart's example for an RCV paper ballot on the left and the digital ballot on the right. And this slide, we have Unison's paper ballot on the left and their digital ballot. So this is how a contest would be laid out and look on their voting system. To touch on ES&S, it is currently creating a built-in tabulator for ranked choice voting. We actually got to see a demonstration of that, and the single winner version of the software is being used in Maine to tabulate the results of the Maine Democratic governor's primary. ES&S has an EAC certified version that can export a cast vote record, which can be tabulated by third-party software or by using Excel spreadsheets or other custom designed software. This version of their software was used in Minneapolis. And this is a ballot that was the ES&S ballot. It was actually the one used in Tuesday's election in Maine. So the others, Clear Ballot does not yet have a built-in system for ranked choice voting, but they have mentioned interest in working with a partner jurisdiction to develop their RCV software, and we know that Clear Ballot is used in your state. The Resource Center is available to contribute to that development if any of you have the chance to work with Clear Ballot on their RCV development process. One other vendor in the U.S. is Microvote. They do not have built-in RCV either, and we are not aware of any plans on their part to create RCV functionality at this time. The next version of the Voluntary Voting Systems Guidelines, also known as VVSG, will include comprehensive standards for ranked choice voting. This will place RCV on par with plurality voting in terms of independent assurance of security and integrity of certified vendors' products. For more information on these vendors and their RCV capabilities, check out their presentations from our April symposium. That's available on our website at the address that you see on the screen. Their presentations run 20 to 30 minutes for each vendor and show the ballot design, results reporting, education programming, and other RCV functionalities of these vendors, their RCV software. If you don't have the most recent versions of vendor software or hardware, the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center and Bright Spots, which is a group of software engineers in the Bay Area, we've developed with them the Universal RCV Tabulator. It's free, open source software for tabulating ranked choice voting elections. This tabulator can take in data from any voting machine capable of exporting a cast vote record and can tabulate a single winner ranked choice voting election according to the rules used in any current RCV jurisdiction in the United States. The tabulator output results in an audit file for RCV elections happen in seconds. Multi-winner RCV tabulation rules are in development now and will be available by the end of this year. We are working to get the tabulator tested by a federally certified lab and are developing it to VVSG standards. And we've got our website on the tabulator on the screen before you, and you can also go to our website to get the recordings on the tabulator and the vendors through our website and the symposium. Once you've sorted out whether you have RCV capable or RCV ready voting equipment, you'll need to think about how you'll actually run that RCV tabulation. Because of the way counting works in RCV, centralization of ballots is essential. Luckily for you all, Washington State already has that sort of centralization built in via your vote by mail system. If you're running multiple voting systems in the same jurisdiction, the Universal Tabulator may be the answer because that can collate and aggregate the cast vote records from those multiple systems to run the RCV tabulation. If you have a single system, you can still use the tabulator or use built-in tabulation software from your vendor. The next few slides provide a quick look at some election and post-election statistics from Minneapolis and Santa Fe. Santa Fe voters used RCV for mayor and in 2 city council races. In that election, 84% of voters found the ballot easy to use. 62% of voters ranked all 5 mayoral candidates, though they didn't have to, and 94% of voters said they were satisfied with their voting experience. 70% of voters said they were very confident their vote was counted as they intended, compared with 55% in a similar 2016 survey in New Mexico. As for actual ballot counting statistics, 96% of ballots cast counted in the final round of the mayoral election. Just 1/3 of 1% of ballots were removed due to voter error, with another 3.7% of ballots running out of rankings from voters. Without RCV, Santa Fe would have had to run a runoff election between the top 2 vote getters. Turnout in that decisive election would have certainly dropped more than the 4% seen in the final round of the RCV election. Minneapolis has now used RCV in 3 election cycles, 2009, 13, and 17. I'll review voter statistics from 13 and 17 now. Voters in Minneapolis, by the way, are limited to 3 rankings. This slide shows statistics that were collected after the November 2017 election. Only 1/5 of 1% of ballots had overvote errors in 2017. It's pretty remarkable. On a ballot that included 35 mayoral candidates in 2013, the error rate was the same. There was also a higher percentage of repeat candidate error, often because voters felt that this could help their candidate. These statistics help identify areas where more voter education may be needed. When reviewing whether voters ranked all 3 choices in 2013 in the various races, we can see that the mayor's race, which had 35 candidates, scored the highest with 76.3% of voters ranking 3 candidates. In 2017, 72.5% of voters used all 3 ranks. In all other races with 3 candidates or more, the majority of the voters chose to rank more than 1 candidate. As in all elections, it is very important to collect this type of data for use in updating and modifying future voter education efforts. And with that, I think that we have gone on quite a bit. So we're going to say thank you for joining us for this presentation. We'll go into a Q&A session, and we hope that this has helped you understand the ins and outs of RCV administration. We have recorded today's session, and we're going to put this recording and the supplemental Q&A document on our website in the next few weeks for you to review or to share with your colleagues. We're also going to make some handouts available, so you'll have links to all these websites and also our model implementation plan. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube, and we have also launched a podcast called RCV Clips, which is available through iTunes, Google Play, and SoundCloud. And now Chris will join us again, or join me again, and we had hoped to have Gary Bartlett on to answer questions with us, but unfortunately we've had some technical difficulties getting him connected with us today. So you've got just me and Chris.
Okay, Karen, this is Skip. Karen and Chris, first of all, thanks for taking the time out. You see, it's getting kind of late back on your side of the world. Here, it's just early in the afternoon. I got so far about 4 questions, if not more. I think they'll start coming in, so we're going to pass the mic around, and you can answer the questions. Can you hear me fine?
We can hear you fine. And yep. Please, if we can't get to all the questions, please make sure those get sent to us, Skip, because we can do those in our document afterwards.
Okay.
All right, so for the transferable vote, you guys said when a candidate gets more votes than they need, their excess votes transfer to other candidates. How do you pick which ballots get transferred to other candidates? Like which ones are the surplus votes versus which ones are the votes that count for them?
Yeah. So this gets into some really technical part of multi-winner ranked choice voting. We don't have a slide for it, but the way it works is you take the next ranked candidate on every ballot, counting for the person who won, and you calculate the share of support each candidate has on this winner's ballots. And you transfer the surplus proportionally based on that share of support among that candidate's whole set of voters. So you get into actually some fractions actually there in making sure that you transfer the exact precise share of each person's support as a part of that surplus.
That's why the tabulation software is so nice.
Yeah.
That was my question.
Are there other questions? Hi. One of the challenges in Washington State is that we're a postmark state, so a lot of times our ballots don't come in until way after Election Day. So one of the concerns is if you have a tight 3-way race, you're not going to know who you're going to eliminate maybe until the day before we have to certify the election. So there's some concerns. I don't know how we'd be able to address something like that. Have you had any other issues with that? I mean, polling places are nice because they're done at 8, but we're not done for 2 weeks after the election.
So,
yeah, well, you can, go ahead, Karen.
Chris and I can both touch on this, I think. So you can go at it more than one way, but Maine is actually a great example of what you're touching on. They actually have quite many voting precincts that do not have actual machines, so they still hand count and so forth. So they are in the process right now, and the reason why they haven't tabulated their RCV contest yet is that they are bringing those ballots into their state office, and we'll begin the tabulation process then. And what you didn't see in the rest of that video is the Secretary of State has done a great job of outlining the expectations of when the tabulation would take place. So I think that would be one of the keys in how you administer it, is just setting the expectations of when you're going to see results. You'll often hear the term instant runoff voting, but we've tried to make sure over the years, that's the single winner method, that folks don't think it's as instant as, well, I'll say grits because I'm in the South, but it's not one of those things you pop it in the microwave and 2 minutes later. It's not that instant, but it is faster than having a runoff or an additional election. And I think, Chris, if you want to touch on how San Francisco's handled, that would be another good example.
Right, that's what I was going to mention. So San Francisco just had a mayoral election using ranked choice voting last Tuesday, June 5th. And they've been releasing preliminary results. They're also a postmark state, so anything sent by election day will get included in that final count that they have to certify. And the way they do it there is they start releasing unofficial tallies of polling place ballots on Tuesday night, and they release a new tally every day thereafter. until they finish counting. So they're still releasing tallies right now. It's actually been really interesting to see because towards the end of last week, Mark Leno was second place in the first round with first choices and had pulled ahead of London Breed in the later rounds of counting, thanks to transfers from a third candidate named Jane Kim. And London Breed was the sort of establishment frontrunner in this race. And then as more ballots came in, as more absentee ballots came in and provisionals got counted, London Breed started pulling ahead throughout the whole course of the election and is now winning outright. Mark Leno actually just conceded yesterday. So it has, like Karen says, I think the most important thing is transparency up front to talk about how it can be delayed. And San Francisco this election is really interesting because they've been using RCV there now for 14 years. So I think people have come to anticipate that sort of result happening. And that might be a challenge if it's your first or second RCV election, seeing the results change like that. But so knowing that it can happen is really helpful, and San Francisco administrators will have really good lessons on how to anticipate that, how to talk to your voters about it.
And what we found here in Washington State, it's usually the public's not so concerned about the results. It's more about the candidates.
Yeah, right. That's a good question. I can't speak to that, but Karen.
In our situation in North Carolina, we had. I wish Gary could be on, since he was the former state director and had to manage the candidates more than I did out in the field. But yes, the candidates can be a challenge. But again, it was setting the expectations with them. There were packets provided to the candidates about what to expect and how the process would go through. And in North Carolina's case, we had a special vacancy election where we used ranked choice voting. And that happened in 86 days. That's when we got notice that that would be used for the first time statewide since the 1930s. And so what was really key is that we set expectations, and we even went through a recount. That was it. The candidates worked with us, and they understood what was going to take place.
And I would add also, Jane Kim and Mark Leno campaigned as a sort of, as a ticket. They said, if you're going to rank Mark first, rank Jane second, and vice versa. And so they sort of anticipated this result potentially happening, with London Breed just staying ahead the whole time.
So that's actually a perfect segue into my question. This is Vicki at Spokane County, and we do a lot of recounts. In fact, we structure everything in our process to prepare for recounts, because we end up with so many recounts. We're a swing county. And so that's my concern, is how difficult is it to conduct a hand recount of a ranked choice voting election? Let's just say that you only get to do 3, so that you can only rank 3.
Well, our recount in North Carolina didn't require a hand recount, though we did. Our audit procedures did have a hand-to-eye audit, so we did hand-to-eye audit that contest, and successfully did that over 100 counties. So it's really, our experience with doing the recount was that we just instructed the counties to follow the same procedures as any recount. There are additional steps because the tabulation's different, but the method, the process, the steps that you take are very much the same. And we've got recount procedures from Minneapolis. They've done a recount even in this past election that we can share. And Chris, is it San Francisco that we also have recount procedures for?
We have their audit procedures, but San Francisco hasn't actually had to do a recount yet of ranked choice voting.
So that's something we would, I mean, I know I'm being very general there, but I think that would be something that certainly we can work with you through your specifics, because it is a jurisdiction by jurisdiction case. But it's much like any recount that you would do.
I have a question about the confidence level of the voters. You mentioned that people feel more confident about their election when they understand how their votes are tabulated. RCV seems to be a very complex method of tabulating votes. How, other than those two examples you showed from those districts in California, how do you convince people that this is a better system than plurality, which is a very simple to understand system?
I can speak a bit from the fair vote perspective and try and do the resource center perspective, but I think Karen will be better at that part. We actually had a really interesting presentation from Casey Carl, the Minneapolis city clerk, during our April symposium, and he talked a lot about how when you're talking about voting methods with your voters and teaching them about ranked choice voting or something else, it's important to lead with values and talk about the values that that voting method reinforces. So in Minneapolis, when they're talking about their single winner method, they sort of reinforce this creates consensus candidates, it creates less divisive campaigning, and that's like that's what they lead with, is the message of what they think ranked choice voting is for and how they think it reinforces community values in Minneapolis. And then, you know, it does get back to showing people how the tabulation works, and just making sure that they feel comfortable with their ballot. And what we've seen is in the usability testing with the Center for Civic Design, sorry, I'm just going back to this slide. Whitney from the Center for Civic Design has said again and again that people feel really, when they hear those sorts of values, when you talk about majority or consensus candidates, greater civility, proportional representation, and also show them how the results work, they tend to buy in. If you talk to them also about how it can save money if you're eliminating elections, people really like that. There's actually a voter education guide that they put together that Minneapolis based this guide on, that originally had on the right column just like 4 big values that ranked choice voting, that people who they were talking to, these regular everyday voters, the Center for Civic Design was talking to, liked a lot, and said made them think more highly of ranked choice voting. So that was things like saving money, like consensus candidates, or greater representation.
I think the other thing that we've learned along the way is voters don't like surprises. That's where their trust is, you know, or their questions come up. And so that's why we've learned through the usability study and just by practice that when they know how the results are tabulated and in a basic understanding, that they then know why the person who may have gotten the most votes in the first choice winds up not being the winner. And that was actually the case in North Carolina. When we went into the additional rounds of counting, the front runner did not win. And but the voters had been, the tabulation process had been explained to them. And when we did exit polling, we had also had 2 cities that had used it for their city elections, and one was more urban, one was more rural, and yet the exit surveys from the voters was that they thought it was very easy to understand. What we have found, even from then and in 2010 on into today, and then you look at how long Cambridge has been using it, you realize that it's actually a pretty natural process for voters, and they feel like they're having a say. If you not to get into the politics of our presidential election, but the voters were presented with more than Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, but they felt like they had to strategically think through their mind whether they should be voting for Gary Johnson or Jill Stein or some of the others that qualified in different states. And if they feel that they can rank them, then they feel that they have a say, and can vote for that person, and know that their other choices at least will have some recognition.
You have the guy that runs this conference is making people shuffle to other rooms.
Understand. And we're getting ready for dinner.
So everybody was paying attention. Thank you so much for both Chris and Karen, both of y'all's input for this. Thank you so much, and we'll be in contact in the future.
Wonderful. We hope to be there in person next time, and please send us questions. We're still happy to answer more questions.
Sweet. That didn't work out.
No, it's good.
I thought it went well.
Thank you.
I think that was good, right?